And we'll start. Good morning. My name is Sean Silver. I work for MassDEP, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, in the Commercial Waste Reduction Branch. And I wanted to welcome folks to MassDEP's Recycling Market Development Workgroup. Got a couple of kind of introductory measures here before we get to our speakers and the larger conversation for this morning. So, as far as this meeting and the work group that I just mentioned, it supports our solid waste master plan, which is updated every 10 years and kind of recognizes the challenges of waste disposal in the Northeast and the shrinking disposal capacity in Massachusetts in particular. So we convened this particular group in 2022 as an opportunity to understand, identify, discuss potential resources and solutions for different groups of materials that we thought local markets could be beneficial for those. Off of those discussions, we created a recycling market development action plan. We've carried out several pieces of that plan in the last couple of years, most notably our launch of the Waste Reduction Innovation Grant Program. And the work groups overall, we kind of separated those work group meetings into 4 material categories. Packaging, which everybody knows that's garnering a lot of discussion, particularly from an EPR perspective. Organics, for which Massachusetts has a waste ban. Bulky items, which include construction and demolition materials, and also mattresses, which received a MassDEP waste ban in 2022. And then there was a group for materials with new and emerging markets. And we know that e-waste isn't a new material and by any means, but it's always changing. The profile of it's always changing, and it's omnipresent. Everybody has that. And in particular, solar panels. We know the state ramped up installation of these in prior decades, and with the help of MassCEC, which is the Clean Energy Center, Department of Energy Resources, and Recycling Works, put together a white paper on solar a few years back. And it's estimated, based off that research, that if you're using a 25-year lifespan, and we know that a lot of panels come offline before that, right? But this is just kind of working conservatively here. The amount of solar panels retired in mass should reach about 6,500 tons annually by 2030, with a maximum annual tonnage of about 40,000 tons annually by 2050, which, we're getting rid of 6 million tons of waste in mass annually. Is that, a huge part of it? No, but it's a part of it, and we're trying to address all the parts. In particular, this is, tricky waste to manage. And we're going to be seeing more. That's just an inevitability. 40,000 tons annually in the future is a pretty big inevitability. So the simple question that we head into this with is, where do they go when they need to come down? So we're working on updating that white paper. We conducted outreach to contacts in the solar recycling and e-waste industries. And, we're looking at this as part of the solid waste hierarchy. Obviously, we're not going to be reducing solar installs. So you take the reduce out of it. We know that reuse is a pathway as well. We're going to be focusing specifically on solar recycling today. We don't think that's something that we've addressed as a state really yet. And we're really hoping that that information exchange can be beneficial to our mass stakeholders, whether it's at the municipal level, commercial, or, you're looking at this from an NGO perspective, et cetera. We're trying to reduce waste by 30% by 2030. We'll see if we get there or not, but either way, having these conversations are just a very important part of that overall picture. Noted we have some speakers today on the call, and we're thankful for them joining us. We have Londi Bracali, who's Business Development Manager with MedTech. They operate 5 R2V3 certified recycling facilities across the U.S., one of which is right in Worcester, Massachusetts. Also on the call, David Hirschler, Chief Sustainability Officer for ERI, largest electronic recycling, IT asset disposition provider in the US. They operate a facility right here in Holliston. And Brett Henderson, the co-founder and CEO of SPR, which was spun off from Powerhouse Recycling. His North Carolina-based company operates 4 facilities nationwide. We want to give each speaker some time to address what they're seeing in the solar industry. There are also other wastes from renewable energy. It's kind of the elephant in the room, I guess. Lithium-ion batteries are always a part of a conversation about e-waste, right? Battery storage, heat pumps, etc. There's probably not enough time to get to all of those things, but I have kind of asked for, we'll focus on solar, but yeah, we know that there's other conversations that go along with this as well. If we touch on them today, great. Maybe there will be some ground for future conversations. Administratively, there will be time for questions at the conclusion of each presentation and an opportunity for discussion during the second half of the meeting today. So I'd encourage folks to raise your hand, so we can kind of give an equitable distribution here of people's opportunities to talk. And entering questions into the chat is also appreciated as well. We'll dole them out as they come in. So without further ado, unless there's any specific questions about, the process here or any of the stuff that I just said, I want to hand it over to Londi for the first of our 3 presenters. And, again, thanking you all for your time and expertise in joining us this morning.
Thanks very much, John. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Let me load up my screen here. All right. Hopefully you can see that. Okay.
Not seeing it yet. Maybe I need to stop sharing. That's my fault. There you go.
Okay. There you have it. Thank you very much for that.
All right. Always a good tech blunder by Sean is a good way to lighten the mood. So there you go, Londi.
It's all good. Hey, thanks very much. So basically, MassDEP, a little quick fun fact if you don't know who we are. We've been in the recycling business since 1875, long time. And back then, of course, it was metal scrap smelting and a different game than it is now. And been under the MassDEP name since 1968. So today, we're going to just talk kind of quickly through, because there's a lot of details in all of this, and we'll get some Q&A. Like Sean was mentioning, you can't really touch all of it in a meeting like this, but we can at least have a conversation. That's the whole goal of this. But we're talking about full service solar and infrastructure recycling, not just the panels, because we do everything that's on the field. Okay, there you go. So there is a growing need. It's rapid growth, new construction pretty much all over the place. So we're talking about new construction, repowering, upfitting older sites, getting rid of some of the assets of the older sites. So that's obviously we have to do something with this material. So it's the modules, it's the BESS units, which is the battery energy storage, and of course the entire electrical infrastructure. And that's what we're going to get into here. But another fun fact here, the growing need, currently around 8,650 major solar projects representing 366 gigawatts of capacity. Now, that's a big number, but what does it mean? It's powering around 100 million average size homes, and it's only getting bigger. The map that you see here are showing you new construction, existing sites, and it's just exploding everywhere. 203 gigawatts of major solar projects currently operating, 160 gigawatts large scale solar projects under construction or development. And again, it's growing exponentially. Another kind of interesting chart from 2025, 1 megawatt solar installation power is about 150 to 200 homes. This shows the 2025 scale. So, and we've been probably doing solar now for over 10 years. And then the last 5, it's become a major part of what we do. Okay, so we do have some challenges with renewable energy life cycle. Now, renewable energy, of course, it gets into batteries, it gets into wind, it gets into solar, the whole bit. But here we're looking at new construction, damaged material, repowers, and decommissioning. Now, the farms do have some maintenance that have to take place, and we get damaged panels from storms, accidents, and that sort of thing. So with the expanding growth of the industry, there's a lot of moving parts, and some are getting upfitted with new, better performing panels, and the other ones are, even though they're still working, there could be a home for the ones that are still working. So I'll explain a little bit later on that because there's some resale opportunity for ones that actually work. And of course, ones that really aren't producing enough energy. So there's just a total destruction there. And I'll walk through what that would look like as well. So there's a definite crucial need, not just for the recycling, but management of this whole life cycle that we're in, and everything on that farm. One of the things that happened, you know, the far upper right picture is of an event that took place where we were scheduled to do a solar panel removal off of a site. Well, then it ran into a brush fire, and these sort of things happen. In another incident, we had a thermal runaway. We had a BESS unit that caught fire, and it was really devastating. And you can see the pictures. It happens. I mean, I'm involved in three or four of them right now. So it's one of these things where we have to deal with fire damage on solar farms. It could be an electrical event. It could have been a storm. Um, this requires environmental specialists now. This isn't just hauling away, just cleaning it up. You have to deal with the uh, the compliance around that, the EPA, yeah, we have the DEQ here. So the thermal runaway and battery events that take place, they have to be handled in a special way because these are lithium batteries, and not only do they burn very hot, they are difficult to go out. These tanks that you see, this metal container looks like a shipping container. It's actually designed for the battery energy. Battery energy storage is on these sites because if we don't use the energy the panels are producing, where's it go? So we have to, it stores that energy. But the batteries themselves act as a daisy chain if they get reacted. So we have specialists that will come in on the project, do the assessment, do the soil sampling, all the reporting behind that, and the removal and the cleanup of the entire area that's affected. And then the rest of the job, if they're doing a repower, whatever else was going on site, gets completed after that. But this would like to take care of first. So those are one of the things that I like to mention because it's not an everyday occurrence, but when it happens, you have to act quickly. And we are in a position to where we don't have to the site owner or whoever's running the maintenance, they don't have to find someone to do it. It's built into the system we already have. So we're handling everything on that site. We have specialized expertise for not just the panels, but like I say, the damaged goods, the information that we get from the project manager or the site manager. We take this initial intake call. Every site's a little bit different, and we'd like to take the overall assessment of what they're trying to accomplish, what's going on there, and if any of these events happen between now and then, we can act promptly, and it works really well. That no one's scrambling. We just act. So we have an extensive network for processing too. We have a nationwide coverage, also with our partners and our downstream partners for the finishing end of some of the material. They have to reprocess it. Nationwide logistics that we handle. One throat to choke. Once we get the request in, we handle all of it. All you got to do is, approve the paperwork and we're ready to go. So we'll do the coordination of the material, movement, palletizing, banding, wrapping, loading the trucks. We can do everything on the site. So in other words, we'll do as much or as little as the site needs. It really depends on what we're doing. Sometimes I'll just coordinate a move while they're installing new panels. We'll use the labor on site already there to remove the old, if that's something we can coordinate. So we're all about trying to manage the budget on it as well, but we want to be able to provide all the resources necessary for each site. And that goes for the developers, the manufacturers. We work with them too, O&Ms that are on the site, project managers, and people that are running it if it's new construction. So all of that's covered. This shows our infrastructure to support this on a processing perspective. So we've got 5 processing facilities and 3 additional warehouses that we have to ship to. So we have a total of 5 here, but the other 3 we like to, because of logistics, we have a place we can work with them there and then ship them wherever it's going to get processed. So I'm in the Roxborough location. We got Worcester, Mass, where Sean is. We got Denver, Salt Lake City, and our headquarters is out in Gilroy, California. So with that, we've got our local trucks that we could use as well. And the larger projects, we like to use the flatbed, so we get that with our partners, but third party. Now, we've got agreements across the country with to work the third party logistics if it's not going to be our trucks. And again, there are any partner we may use, if it's not our own, they have to be vetted out, screened, and approved. So we don't just work with anyone because of our certifications and things that we like to document. So on the farm, the solar farm materials, we're going to recover the modules themselves, which would be include the glass, the aluminum frame, silicon, any other valuable metals that's inside those, the battery energy storage units. Some of them are small, some of them are very large. I was doing a pretty decent sized job in Texas. I think they were about 38,000 pounds each, and we had 19 of them. It's a lot of them to move. It's a big site. Inverters, switch gears. So again, electrical control systems, recovering the metal, the plastics, any other pieces. So we're going to be separating all the material and basically breaking it down to a commodity at that point for reuse in some way once that gets shredded or processed. So transformers, electrical equipment, again, recovering of copper, aluminum, steel, and in management of any potential fluids that could be in that, and cooling fluids and things like this. Copper, cabling, again, we want to recover high value copper and all this material, which, um, we base everything on the market value of the day, which fluctuates, as everyone knows. And those credits are due back to that site after we determine what that is, which is kind of cool if you're doing a repower situation. So you have some of the costs of processing solar panels, for example, and you'll have some credits for other goods, such as the copper and equipment we're taking out that has more value in it. So it's good to have a blend of both. The mounting systems, racking, of course, the aluminum, any kind of steel structure, and all of that has value too. And if it needs to be removed for a decommission, we'll remove that as well as concrete below it. Okay, panels themselves, the aluminum frames, they're pretty lightweight. I mean, I got some pretty decent sized ones off these sites that are probably 85 pounds or so each. Um, Glass, we purpose the glass. Our process removes the silicon behind it. So we have clean glass we're dealing with. We have silicon that's reusable, and we have, of course, the value for the aluminum frames, copper, silver, precious metals, and of course the plastics. So all of it is going to be separated out, and that's part of our processing, and all our facilities can do that. Here's kind of a quick breakdown. So we'll do the initial intake and grading of the panels, and a lot of times we'll know this in advance. They'll say, hey, these are all broken. They're cracked. They're whatever. We got, 5,000 of these things. We're just going to get rid of them. Okay, great. Now we know exactly what to do. If they're unsure, we will let them know. But in a lot of cases, they are broken. So once the material is received, each flock gets photographed and weighed, and we document everything from, the first foot we're on site to the very end. Everything is documented and recording. We put it in a portal that you have access to watch the process and download all of the documentation that follows it. So we'll do the grading, dismantling of the aluminum frame, which goes through another process to take the glass and the silicon out. The junction box, all of it gets removed. The glass gets shredded, much more manageable components for more weight. And basically all those pieces end up getting separated out, and we're looking at now the cleanest commodity for recovery. And that's using everything, nothing going into a landfill. So everything is going to be reused in some way from that processing breakdown. Okay, field services. So again, this is like I mentioned earlier. This is we will do as much or as little as needed on the site. So we could do on-site labor, palletizing, banding, wrapping, using our labor equipment, loading the flatbeds, and then leaving, going to the closest MassDEP facility, or coordinating with current labor that's there. And sometimes we go to a site, there's nobody there. We have access to it, and we have to do all of it. So it just depends on the situation. We'll do the equipment coordination, packing, sorting, staging. Uh, we get aerial shots. We get all the data ahead of time through our first intake call to see the lay of the land and where the truck's going to go. We have all that done through project manager on that site. So we work with the crew if there's a crew there, and our project team will pretty much take over from there. So again, from solar farm decommissioning, and it could be removal of everything on that site down to the grass. We won't take the grass, but we'll take everything else. The removal of the BESS units themselves, depowering. Can't ship those things fully charged like that if there's a lot of charge in it. Equipment dismantling, the logistics around all of that, with the people movement and the freight, and of course the end cleaning up the site so that there's nothing laying around in the back, even leftover scrap, wood, whatever it might be, will all be removed. So Metex's got a zero landfill commitment. So we are an electronics recycler. So I say that because we do a lot of complex materials such as, airplane components from military. It could be HIPAA compliant medical equipment. So all of that what we do is under that umbrella of zero landfill. When we got into the renewable energy, we incorporated that into the existing process we already had, including R2V3, which then wasn't even required. So we've been doing above and beyond since day one on all of that. So again, this is to support the circular economy. That way everything gets reused in some way, shape, or form. If a component cannot be resold, it will be broken down to be reused at a commodity level. So again, material recovery, zero landfill, and you're going to get documentation and reporting on that. Responsible processing, that sounds kind of generic, but what it really means is it's a processing components to where it's not just to our in-house standards or R2 standards, but we want to go above and beyond doing the right thing and also being accountable to that, in addition to compliance of any kind of laws, state laws and local laws around the electronic equipment. And of course, at the end of the day, the renewable life cycle. We want to be able to show what happened at end of life, and the renewable energy company or the power company has a great story to tell. So they can use that story and they can publish it. They can say, hey, this is proof of not only are we producing green energy, but we're also utilizing the material that and the equipment to take to create that energy. And we're also being responsible to that as well. So full circle on that. Compliance certifications. This is huge, very, very important for auditing reasons, for doing what we say reasons. We're not going to be uh, just talking about, hey, this is recycling. Well, what does that really mean? We have to document it for our audit. So we got R2V3, which is the gold standard for electronics recycling. Quality management systems for ISO, and we got environmental ISO, and of course, occupational health and safety. CM registration is not really a part of this particular process, but it does gain a little bit of credibility when you learn that this is all government required stuff. So we do DoD material and destruction, so it's pretty secure. We're also members of SIA, and we support all of their events and things that they do there. We're proud members of SIA. We work very closely with them in many different applications and avenues. Project transparency and reporting. Documentation is really big in our world. So we want to provide full transparency from start to finish via our secure online portal. It's a web-based portal. You get access to that. either direct access to the portal or through our website, medtechrecycling.com. And you'll see, I think it's in the upper right corner. There's a link to get to the portal. To the right side of the screen here, it says real-time ordering. Well, it's almost real time. It's cloud-based, so there's a little lag there, but it's pretty close. Certificates, well, not just that, but everything, all of the reporting from the entire project will be uploaded there by job, by project. So if you're let's say, a power company and you've got 16 or 18 different sites that you're managing, all of them will be listed right here in the status up to date. So you don't have to go hunting around calling somebody to find out what's going on. So the management of the job's progress is online, as well as having the one person to contact and all the reporting to download. CO2 emissions report is another big one we do for those that need it. Usually it's the larger companies or larger power companies. This is going to show you all the advanced and gains that you've made through the recycling program outside of staying out of a landfill. In other words, it's going to show you the very big picture of what you've contributed at a local level in many different ways. The WARM report, CO2 emissions report, basically all of the gains that you've made from these activities, in addition to the financial reporting along with that. All right, some clients we have. This is a very small list, though. You might have heard of some of these names: Tesla Energy, Siemens, many more on here that we couldn't even fit. So we'd be here all day because we work them all over the country. And that is most of my stuff. Thanks for listening, and I'll bring it back to Sean.
Sure. Thank you, Londi. Appreciate that perspective. If folks have specific questions or comments, again, feel free to raise your hand or we can get to it in the chat. I do see a couple of things in the chat. One is from Julia Wolf, who's with our environmentally preferable purchasing program and the occupational services division. Says, thank you for MedTech Recycling being a Commonwealth OSD statewide contract vendor.
Oh, yeah, very much.
Hazardous universal medical electronic waste disposal and emergency response. So yeah, the
Excellent.
statewide vendors obviously very important to what we're doing here in the state for a lot of different materials.
It's funny. We have been involved in Massachusetts almost from the beginning. Now, our early days, MedTech's headquarters was in Worcester, long time ago. And yeah, we've been on the state contract for I don't know, 3 or 4 times every 5 years, right? So it's been a long time. But thanks very much, Julia.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons, obviously, we wanted to invite you is knowing that you have that local base as well as a national presence.
Right.
One question that we received, and I think you went over, I guess some of the ways that you have to be careful to be certified, right? But one thing that people want to know about, I've heard this question a lot, is about the hazardous constituents. Do the solar panels get treated as hazardous waste because of the components, and how does that affect the process?
They're not technically hazardous. They're technically universal.
Right.
But like anything in electronic, though, if like that one I showed you that literally got caught in a brush fire, now that become hazardous now.
Mm-hmm.
So it changed. So now cadmium telluride, those would be a little bit more on the hazardous side. But a lot of those standardized panels we see on these farms, not so much. They're considered universal.
And you mentioned cadmium telluride. I mean, how is that, if at all, how's that affecting what you're looking at going forward in terms of the market share of that?
There isn't that much of it. We're not seeing that much of it at all. It's very little. It's very little.
And I wanted to ask like the Massachusetts specific question too, because you showed the map. Obviously, you're out of NC. The facilities are nationwide, but several of them are in the South and Southwest. I think we see that with our other folks here. Obviously, a nationwide presence, but facilities in the South and Southwest. And I kind of, from conversations, yeah, we're just not seeing a whole lot of volume out of the, say, the Northeast, right? And I get it. You just don't have as many solar farms up here. Um, but what are you seeing, I guess, at a Massachusetts level in terms of things that are coming offline for solar panels?
Most recently, I've had several projects. They were rooftop
Mhm.
panels, a lot of those kind of things. Schools have them too, um, but not large scale farms. But I've seen a lot of rooftop and more of the smaller 50 pounders, or the residential. We see a lot of those too. And I work with other companies that are like distributors and people like that they handle a lot of these. Um, yeah, so we don't see enormous amount of farms, but I've done a few projects up there though. Yeah.
Do you see that as those rooftop installs, really start to, I don't think the word would be taper off, but they wouldn't be tapering off as they start to come offline with more frequency, more breakage, more just end of life. Are we going to need processing capacity, to be heightened up here?
Um, well, I have a feeling that it's just you're gonna see more of it everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not the farms aren't as concentrated there as they are maybe in the South, but they're like you'd be surprised. Florida, they don't have that many either. You would think it would, but they don't.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see rooftops, of course, and I don't think they're going away. I think they're going to be more installed and probably reinstalled, taking the lower producing out and replacing them with better producing panels. Because like anything in technology, things keep advancing, and they're lighter, they're carrying more wattage, they're just better performers.
Mhm.
And in some cases, it's easier and more profitable, really, to replace those panels to produce far more than what the underperforming panels are. Yeah, you got to invest it, but you'll recover it later. And in some cases, those panels that are still working, they could be resold or repurposed. I've even done some repurposing to other countries who basically have nothing. So we set them up to actually do it. And sometimes we don't even charge for it. We just ship it. We
Mhm.
know people out there all over the world, and we don't advertise it, but I've seen them do that with computers and all kind of stuff for schools and things. So things like that can happen. There's lots of ways to deal with uh, pianos they have some life left.
Yeah, I threw a couple of questions in there just to see if it would some prompt the group here, and we got a whole bunch of these coming in now. So I'll do a couple more at least, and then we can kind of keep rolling along here. I think there'll be some opportunities for each of our presenters to address it. But I know Brett popped up. Brett will be presenting today as well. And this is something that, we ran into here about the state waste designations and how that's important, how it defaults to EPA, unless there's something on the books for the state that panels are considered hazardous, unless you take the TCLP or there's knowledge of that being the case. So obviously, you're going to have some specific state instances where they might say otherwise. What did I just do there? Did I knock you offline, Blondie or Blondie?
No, I think I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I went to admit a person into the meeting, and for whatever, well, I think somebody else admitted them, and then they disappeared, and then I clicked a button I didn't want to click. So I'm glad everyone's still here.
Ah.
So okay, good. Um, Question from Wayne. He says, "What's the market coordination between material and design relative to recyclability?" And he's asking kind of about the supply chain here as new PV materials are developed. What's the incentive to have circularity?
That's a good question. The incentive for circularity. Well, think about it. Why are you getting solar panels? Let's just go that way. Why are we
Right,
doing this? You
right.
want green energy, right? So if you're doing the green energy, you don't want to landfill bad panels. That doesn't look good. Talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Mhm.
You want to be able to support the renewable efforts. That's why you're doing it. what the power companies, I call them power companies, but site owners, whatever you want to call them, the struggle that they've had were two big ones, really. Number one, they didn't know what the cost was going to be at the time. And I'm going some years back. But they know something has to be done with it. At the same time, they don't want it landfilled either. So just like anything in manufacturing, they don't really um, have the end in mind when we're going to market and we're developing a new product or material. We'll deal with that later when the time comes. That's always the case. But it's in that question there is it's part of the process of being responsible. Otherwise, you wouldn't be interested in solar to begin with. So you're trying to come up with alternative energy sources, and the material that produces that energy has to be dealt with also, and that should be in the same respective manner under that umbrella of being responsible.
Thanks. All right. Yeah, I think we'll leave it here. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your, kind of candid answers on this here. And if you'd stick around, that would be great. And we'll hand it off to David for the next round.
Right now, but it'll be over in a half hour.
Great, thanks, Sean. Let me also share here.
You know where we are, right? 267 Norfolk. Okay,
Somebody's
Okay.
somebody's talking. Anybody hearing that? Can't figure it out.
There, I think that went away.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, so I will dive right in. First of all, thanks for having me today. As Sean said, I'm Dave Hirschler, Chief Sustainability Officer at ERI. There we go. So just ERI, we're like the largest e-waste ITAD provider in the US. We're based out of Fresno, California, but we've got 8 locations spread throughout, as Sean said, with the local facility there in Holliston, Massachusetts. We've actually Massachusetts was our second facility we opened after California. So we've been there quite a long time. Also certified. We are both R2 certified, E-Steward certified, as well as all the ISOs. And then more on the e-waste side of things, a lot of the data security and technical safeguard regulations, certifications, which doesn't really apply for solar panels, but of course, you're never getting one thing at a time. So generally what we're doing, ITAD services for devices, batteries, solar panels, as we talked about, and then we're also very heavy in the EPR and ARF space on the legislative compliance side. So data security for hard drives is a big part. I'm just jumping through a background of who we are. This is obviously not the solar panel portion. Here is our reuse testing side of the business, where we're looking for assets to be able to put back out into the market. We do use this area for panel testing as well. As Londi said, there is some potential reuse out there for panels. Either they're replaced before their end of life for more efficient versions, or they still have enough power that can be used for alternative services. So we would fully test those devices in our ITAD spaces. And then we are processing material down to commodities as well. So in terms of panels, a lot of this is pretty repetitive. Mostly what we're doing is a lot of the work is on the decommissioning side of things. So unlike smaller electronics, panels tend to be installed. They're very large. They require a lot of manual disassembly. And so most of our panel work is going to include that decommission side of things, and then the moving of these large materials to our facilities. Also, similar reporting system. We want to make sure that everything that comes in and out of our doors from customers is reported and tracked and available for everybody as well. And then we have custom reports in down to the asset level as well on that end. So with solar panels, as I talked about, we're pretty heavily involved in EPR and other regulations. There has been a bit of a push to grow EPR for solar panels with limited success. So in the industry has been pretty adamantly opposed to solar panel EPR. And therefore have sort of threatened to leave states that have EPR in place. So in Washington State, for example, that they have the first full EPR program, and that continues to get delayed. There have been the other area that's coming in and becoming more common as opposed to EPR is actually regulations on installation. And so what's starting to pass throughout the country is where if you request a permit to install a rooftop panel, you're required to have an end-of-life plan as part of your permit submission. That gives some sort of guarantee that at least it's being thought of, as opposed to an EPR mandate that has a very long time scale and can be a bit of a challenge, especially with the industry opposition. There's also quite a bit of discussion, and actually this is now a little old. I should have updated this and we talked about this in the chat as to whether or not panels should be declared as universal waste. California, Hawaii actually also have decided it's universal waste, and then New Jersey has a proposal, and a few other states a proposal to define it as universal waste. What that does is eliminates the need on the receivers to determine whether or not they need to be handled as hazardous waste or not. Generally, it's very unclear which panels would fail or pass a TCLIP test. There are some databases that have been developed of every model out there and trying to determine which ones are hazardous or not. Most of them are non-hazardous. Very few of them exceed any sort of TCLIP threshold, but it's still kind of an open question. And so therefore, there's kind of a push to make them universal waste. Even the CDTE panels that we'll talk about also often may not fail a TCLIP test either. So it's simply a matter of knowing individual panels, how to handle those. Panel types. So we've got a few different types. You've got your thin film and your the most common, which is the mono and polycrystalline panels. They are the large-scale solar farms tend to be the thin films, which include some of the older Telluride panels. And then everything on a residential or business rooftop is generally going to be the mono or polycrystalline panels. And you see kind of the makeup of these panels. Most of it is going to be the glass with the silicon cells in between, and then the aluminum frame and the junction box there. We've talked about, Londi talked about this previously. This slide is before the recent changes in tax credits, so we're expecting to see a little bit of a slowdown here. But the growth has been very dramatic in PV modules. This is US, but globally, it's officially now the cheapest form of energy to install. And so what we're seeing is even where there's slowdowns potentially domestically, the growth isn't slowing down, especially in areas that don't have the energy infrastructure in place. It's now the cheapest way to install new energy. So when we talk about the end of life of panels, right, there's a few sources. One of the sources is simply, the end of life, that these materials are going out of finishing. The other is that there is about 10% breakage rate with new installations. And that seems to be growing because the panels seem to be getting larger and thinner. And so they're quite a bit more brittle, which increases the potential risk of breakage there. And so we're seeing both older panels as well as a lot of newer panels that are coming through the door as well. General process, what's kind of in a panel, it is almost all glass. Next is aluminum, and then the copper silicon. There's actually also some silver in there as well. There's kind of the valuable materials are that aluminum, silicon, and silver, but the glass is the challenge and is by far the biggest volume there. And with the glue that, somebody mentioned before in the chat, that's absolutely the most difficult thing, is that these panels tend to be all glued together. And so whatever shredding process or disassembly process has to be powerful enough to separate out those materials without then having too much dust, etc. So they are quite challenging to process, but the technology is improving quite quickly. Again, mostly what we're doing is we're on site and supporting the actual movement of the material. That's going to be by far the biggest cost and challenge. Is these are very bulky items, custom size, and of course, because there is a good reuse value for some of these items, we want to make sure that they're packaged safely. They also are much easier to process when there's no breakage. So that's pretty key, important process there. And then, we are handling, as Londi said, everything, not just the panels themselves, but the junction boxes, the ESS storage, etc. All of that is going to be handled separately and then processed, with the aluminum and the silicone wafer being the most important areas there. Tracking individual panels by make and model for potential resale is a big portion of what we're trying to do. There is markets out there. They are not always domestic. So therefore, there is a need to make sure that we're properly testing those panels, making sure that they are fully functional before they leave. But the goal is in places where it is either a manufacturer working with us to to eliminate their old excess panels, or other areas where they're essentially good as new or new like panels. We're trying to track individual make, model, serial number, and really fully test those devices so that we can make sure they're functional. Just based on some of the questions that were in the chat before, just want to talk about the glass processing. So as I said, the glass is the biggest challenge with panels. We're in conversations with a few different manufacturers that are trying to develop glass-to-glass recycling. Because most of the glass is currently going into the construction industry. There is some antimony and other additives in the glass that make it not practical to use, similar processes from bottle recycling, etc. So, but if we can get the panel glass in a good enough shape and it's not broken, there's some manufacturers that are starting to evaluate processes and products where they can do some glass-to-glass remanufacturing there. So that's been a big push lately. We've been working with some national labs and trying to figure out better solutions for that. So that is everything I have. I went through quickly because I didn't want to be too repetitive, but happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you, folks. Any specific questions for David? I'll give you a minute to pop them into the chat. I see Julia chiming in saying ERI also a Commonwealth OSD SWC vendor. And thank you. So I did get here, there was a previous question on glass. Dave, you can chime in if you'd like. Here, you did, kind of talk about
Yeah.
glasses. Basically its volume as a percentage of what you're
Yeah.
dealing with there. And one question says glass can be difficult to recycle. How do you handle the glass that has the chemicals between the layers? And then there's another one from Jennifer saying, "Where's the glass to glass recycling innovation happening?" So, if you want to take a second to talk glass here.
Yeah, so in terms of glass to glass recycling, there's a couple of manufacturers that are focused on it. Interestingly, the Telluride panels, which are the older ones, are mostly manufactured by one company, First Solar. They have their own in-house recycling process. And so they're doing that glass to glass recycling for their panels. And then the there's another manufacturer in South Carolina that is trying to work on a glass recycling process there. They're a Korean-based manufacturer that are trying to bring their technology to the East. Other in terms of what's happening, as I said, the key is removing those silicon wafers and some of the other layers to be able to enable glass recycling, but mostly it is going into something like the pozzolan or other construction materials because they can handle a little bit more of those additives. I'm trying to go through and answer the questions as we're talking glass, since it's all glass questions here, but my understanding is there's not sufficient antimony in the glass to make it hazardous. It's just a small enough volume that it doesn't work well with traditional glass to glass recycling. So, and it's also unfortunately currently not enough antimony in the glass to focus on antimony recovery because the concentration isn't high enough. So there's actually quite a bit of need for antimony, but it's not enough material in there. Going through also, pain point is disassembly step. Yeah, that's the challenge, is that disassembly. All of that is being automated. And technologies are changing quite a bit with panels. So you'll develop an automation that does a good job of separating the panels, and then you get bifacial panels, which now have glass, have the panel on both sides, and therefore then you need to add to the technology to manage those new sizes. Panels are also getting quite a bit larger and thinner, I think I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're constantly looking at the tech to be able to make sure it can handle all the panels that are coming in. So definitely a pain point, but that's part of the process. We've been doing TVs for 25 years, and when it first started, they were all giant CRT TVs, and now it's flat. Then it was flat screens with mercury in them, and now it's again back to these huge giant LCDs. Very different processes to manage them. So it's part of what we do.
Seems like we got a new one rolling in here about a couple of them actually. About the thin film panels. My question is, do the tests break the glass sandwich? And since small amounts may not be
Yeah.
concerning, when you have an entire project containing 18,000 panels, does that become a concern? Okay, so like a volume, does that change the game?
Yeah. So the good news is that the Telluride panels are almost exclusively one manufacturer, and that manufacturer has their own program.
Okay.
So I think Londi said we're not seeing a ton of those because most of them are going through that system. So yes, it would be a concern, but it's not. It's not a concern in moving the material because it's not high enough to be hazardous, but it is a concern in processing. We wouldn't want to process 18,000 Telluride panels, and not have some issues with our air quality, well, our testing, et cetera. So, but most of that is going through the recycling program of First Solar there.
I did see, and as I was reading here, I don't know if you caught or addressed Kathy's question on solar panel glass potentially as a pozzolon to replace cement and concrete. I know that's been a big topic of conversation. Particularly with Mass, with was that 2018, the major glass processor up here shutting down, everybody
Yeah.
kind of tried to pivot and figure out, all right, what are we doing with our glass? So that's a popular topic these days. Is that something you could address?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely one of the options. I think there's a company that focuses on that pozzolon, and we've had some conversations. We're not sure yet if they have the capacity to take the glass in, but it's definitely those are the types of applications that work well for glass. So for solar glass. So absolutely on that end.
Great. I guess I'll
Uh,
do one more here and we'll move along to Brett. Do you want to take Susan's question about the beyond aluminum and glass, the high value recycling?
Sure. Well, so one of the things I meant to mention is that solar panels are definitely not high value. They're the cost, the glass processing is a cost, and the value of the aluminum, and there's aluminum, silicon, and silver. Those are the valuable items. Well, silicon is not super valuable, but it's necessary, and then silver and aluminum are higher value. But because they're smaller in concentration, there is still a cost to process panels versus a enough value to get past that. But yeah, it's the silver and the aluminum are the big chunks, and then the energy storage items and the accessories to the panels are also, especially the battery energy storage. Those are pretty high value. They have lithium, cobalt, etc. in those batteries.
Great. Yeah, I do see actually one more. And I'd open this up, I guess, to Londi, Dave, or Brett specifically. Um, Janice has a question about partnerships with installers. I know you mentioned kind of, EPR
Yep.
and, some of the proposed measures that are out there that would, make end of life a requirement. Obviously, we're not going to see the results of that for a while. But like I think you said, First Solar takes all the cadmium ones. Um, are any of you folks, do you have specific partnerships where you're getting you're like a service provider for a specific outfit out there?
Yeah, I mean, installers are definitely one of the big chunks of this business. They are often, though, waiting for the cost to come down, and so we often get quotes from installers where they have a warehouse full of old panels and they're waiting for that pricing to come down. But yes, we do quite a bit with installers. It's not a it's currently, except for in a couple of states where they're starting to, as I said, have that be a part of your permit application. It hasn't been a requirement that installers take back the old panels, but it's definitely something that's happening more and more.
Got it. Thank you, Dave, and thanks to everybody who's chiming in with these good questions here. Hopefully, we'll keep that up through our next presentation. I'm gonna bid Dave adieu here, and but of course, hang around. There may be some stuff towards the end here, and we'll get Brett's screen up and have Brett present. There we go.
All right. Are we up and going?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for hanging in there on a lot of great information. There was some repetitive stuff between us three, so I'll kind of brush over those and maybe turn this into a little bit of an information geek out session, which I'm sure there's someone to call that may want that. So
I think we're all in favor of that. So yeah,
yeah, so my name is Brett Henderson. I'm a CEO and co-founder of SPR, headquartered here in North Carolina. A brief history on the company before we kind of dive into the more technical sides of solar panel recycling. SPR is a subsidiary of Powerhouse Recycling, which is a certified electronics recycler founded in 2008. On the SPR side, more specifically, we have 5 million annual panel capacity. We do that all in-house without any outsourcing. And on the e-waste side and solar side of things, we average roughly 85 million pounds recycled annually. We currently have 4 locations that are doing solar, about 400,000 square feet between them, North Carolina, Texas, and Georgia. We'll have a large announcement kind of at the end of Q2, Q3 of our new facility out west. And then we're eyeing Florida for our next regional in 2027. We own and operate 100 plus semi trucks, box trucks, and flatbeds, which could help reduce cost when the mileage between solar site and our recycling facility, lends that to be some cost savings outside of 3PL. Obviously, there's many times in the solar side where you will have to utilize 3PL just simply due to volume and capacity. On the PHR side, 18 years in business roughly. Recycling at scale, quite a bit of glass and focus materials. E-waste is a highly regulated industry, as our other speakers definitely know as well. We have our in-house compliance team here at SPR. In terms of the solar background, we're one of the pioneers in this space in the U.S. We began our R&D back in 2018. Myself and another co-founder spent a good bit of time in the Asian and EU markets, researching alongside specialists and researchers that just know silicon for the past 15, 20 years, other recyclers that would have us, labs, equipment manufacturers. The EU and Asian markets tend to be a little bit more proactive. In the US, we're a little bit more reactionary. We kind of wait till there's an issue and then kind of dive into the recycling side. But I will say on the solar side, we seem to be ahead of that huge avalanche, which is quite positive. All right, let's dive into some numbers and technical side. So solar end of life, setting the stage here. So IRENA had stated, this report's a few years old, that by 2030 there'll be about 1 million tons of solar panels hitting end of life in the US, and by 2050 that will turn to 10 million tons. We actually estimated SPR that those numbers will be slightly bigger. What we have seen entering our recycling facilities in Texas, North Carolina, and Georgia are panels that are roughly at an 11-year life cycle. There's really 4 buckets that modules will hit end of life. First and foremost, most manufacturers have a 25 to 30-year expected panel life, which many very well could reach that. But what happens to kind of speed that up is a repower or tech upgrade, similar to if your IT department is going to issue new laptops throughout the business, even though those old laptops are working, there's a need for a tech upgrade. So what we're seeing in the solar side of things is a lot of early generation farms might only have about 200-watt panels installed. Now you could go to market and get 6, 7, and even 800-watt panels at a 4 times multiplier. So there's ultimately it pencils out to do this refresh. You have weather events that could have a panel go from 1 year anywhere to 30. That weather event could occur. We've handled quite a bit of weather events. Unfortunately, Hurricane Helene it spawned quite a bit of tornadoes in the southeast, which we've done a good bit of cleanups from that event. You'll also just see regular events such as a hailstorm or even a windstorm that could actually bow the panels, kind of allowing these to hit end of life early. And then obviously you have your transportation and construction breakage. Similar to if you were to install new tiles in your kitchen, you're always expected to buy just a little bit more because there'll be some breakage in transportation of these solar panels and breakage as they're being constructed. So kind of hitting on those different buckets that solar panels are hitting end of life, uh, our numbers in today are similar to this 2024 in the top left, where the predominantly what's hitting the recycling stream is construction breakage. So what's interesting about that is that's actually newer technology panels, things such as bifacial, which means there's glass on both sides and no backsheet in it, and some of the newer techs. Decom and repowers was a small percentage of that in our early years. Weather events and O&M breakage is the other part that rounds it out. I did forget that other bucket as well on the previous slide. So operations and maintenance breakage. There's all sorts of events that could cause a panel to hit end of life while it's operating. Things such as a junction box failing, something quite literally falling out of the sky. We've had those events, when they're mowing a solar farm, rocks could hit up. So there's just a laundry list of reasons why a panel could break while it's in operation. And what we're expecting to see, if you look in that bottom right in 2029, is that to really flip. Obviously, decom and repowers are going to be the large throughput to our facilities. Something interesting with the Big Beautiful Bill Act is that it stopped incentives, as David had mentioned, for maybe new installations are put on pause. But on the flip side of that, a lot of planned repowers that were going to be after 2030 have financial incentive to do that ahead of 2030 before some of these incentives sunset. So cost, landfill disposal, depending on the region and market you're in, obviously that could be a little bit higher, maybe even slightly lower, depending on the local landfill cost, but roughly $2 to $5. Incomplete recycling, which we'll talk about in a little bit, could be anywhere from $0, where someone's willing to just take the panels for free, up to $8. And then, true solar panel recycling, which is going to be the sustainable method of handling volume, scale, and regulations, is roughly $8 to $16 a panel. That's including transportation. What we've seen here at SPR in the last 36 months, our costs to our nationwide client base have decreased roughly about 42%. There's a myriad of reasons for that. First and foremost is technology advances. What that could do is not only speed up the solar panel recycling process, but it'll also help recover cleaner commodities, which opens up new markets and new supply chains. We'll talk supply chain a little bit at the tail end of this presentation. Your economies of scale are still something that's quite realized in this industry. When you have consistent throughput, that helps open up different off-takers and consumers of your recycled material when they know they have a consistent supply. And then the largest cost really in this whole solar panel recycling side is going to be transportation. So regional facilities that are actually processing panels on site offer much lower transportation costs from solar site to recycler. We've seen in the industry a lot of lay down yards or just storage warehouses, but that transportation still has to ultimately end up to a recycling facility where they're being recycled. So the more you could shorten that distance, not only is there major CO2 savings, but those same costs to get those 1 million panels on the solar site also have those same costs of freight to come off site. Kind of the current outlook in the US solar market, there's kind of three ways that you'll see recycling. We discussed true recycling, and that's clean separation and recovery of the materials within the module, including the aluminum, glass, silicon, and metals to be reintroduced into supply chains. And glass recycled as glass in the US market is quite important. What you'll see ahead of regulations is quite a bit of incomplete recycling. The aluminum frame is roughly 8 to 12% of the panel by composition. So what will occur in that situation, it's a low-hanging fruit, it has value. So we'll see a lot of scrap metal yards or incomplete recyclers really wanting to bring in these panels, get the aluminum frame off of it, turn that into value. And then the other 90% either is going to be stockpiled for future plans, landfilled, or maybe just commingled and shredded and kind of sent off as flux. That's obviously has some high levels of risk, what we'll talk about. And similar to what we've seen, if you go back about 30 years in the e-waste industry on CRT monitors, kind of ahead of regulations, they're harvesting a couple dollars of copper in it, and then the rest, is ultimately getting landfilled. And then there's reuse. So there is reuse markets in more of a boutique setting. But when you're really talking about hundreds of thousands and millions of panels coming out, there's quite a bit of issues on the reuse side that we'll dive into that offer risk. True recycling. So here at SPR, we have a few different technologies. We mechanically separate. We utilize air. We utilize thermal. We had the nation's first bifacial recycling line put online several years back. For silicon-based modules, we have about 99% recycling rate and recovery rate, and we're getting these clean commodities. The supply chain is super important in this recycling world, and it's where the solar industry, when more solar recyclers like all on this call come online, will help feed different manufacturing supply chains, and more opportunities will pop up. So glass markets, we'll talk a little bit about metals. You have aluminum, copper, silver, and silicon. But there's quite a bit of technical side that goes into this. You don't get to. Yeah, I guess I should take a step back. So our parent company has, multi-million-dollar shredding and separation system. You can feed full copiers through it. It brings it down to the size of a quarter, automatically separates all the various commodities and e-waste. You can't do that on the solar side because of how this is encapsulated. The glues, the adhesives, if you put it through just an e-waste shredder, for example, you're just making smaller pieces of copper silicon glass. So a lot of lab testing goes into once we get our clean commodity separation and that off-taker is ready to take that, we just don't get to just ship them 20 tons of glass. They want to do sizing. They want to see exactly the composition of the glass, what contaminants are in it. And that kind of goes for all different commodities recovered before a consumer will bring this product in and utilize it as a recycled feedstock versus virgin feedstock. Scaling technology is quite important. We invest quite a bit of money in research and development on new solar technology coming down the line and how to make our current technology better. Just in Q1 of 2026 alone, we had $20 million invested in new technology throughout all of our recycling facilities that will come online in different quarters this year. We always want to stay ahead of the demand. We could typically get our technology online, an additional line within about 6 months. So we always want to have capacity, but as we earn 100,000 panel, 200,000 panel repowers, then we will invest further in lines. Currently have about a 1.7 million panel repower going on that's going to occur over the course of a few years. We have about a 5 million panel capacity we discussed. And really the supply chain, it's all about the glass, right? Aluminum has been recycled for 100+ years. All of us being from the e-waste side of things have relationships with precious metal smelters to recover silver, recover copper. But glass is the predominant composition of a solar panel. So if glass isn't getting cleanly recovered in-house and recycled as glass, then recycling percentages could drop quite a bit. Here's some current outlook of our facilities and how we could have coverage on the United States. Without diving too much into our technology, this is our current tech that is actually going to be upgraded even further. But we have either 3D imaging or an AI camera to look at the length, the width, the depth of the panel, where the junction box is located, and talk to the part of the machines. On the mechanical side of things, the glass will be shaved off without actually breaking the encapsulate and grabbing the silicon. We do on-site sizing, crushing, and reducing and screening, so it could go into a myriad different glass markets. In the back end, we are using technology such as electrostatic technology to pull out the copper granule and other metals, as well as density separation to pull out silicon and plastics. Incomplete recycling. So what you see in the bottom right is a warehouse that a landlord reached out on. This was a recycler that was running a warehouse. They were pulling off aluminum. It wasn't regulated in Houston, Texas at the time, and they left behind this type of mess. So it's something that ahead of regulations that true recyclers will consistently battle on, not only a cost perspective, but a maybe more or less, incomplete information going out to the market about recycling capabilities. Reuse markets. So again, there is reuse markets. We've, recycled, million plus panels. Probably a few thousand of those have entered reuse markets, but they're quite limited. We have a white paper, our circularity analysis wrote it. If anyone wants to reach out, we could share it with you. On the issues of taking solar panels and volume and putting them back into the grid, not only in the United States, but abroad. There's a lot of interconnectivity legislation on a used panel. So for example, in the US, once that panel's used, the UL rating is no longer valid. So it's going to be quite challenging to connect to the grid without, that type of validation. There's also all sorts of issues that go into doing this in bulk. It slows down the installation quite a bit. They have to be protected. More packaging materials are needed used. Testing is very in-depth. We have to do flash testing, micro and fracture testing, and high voltage leakage testing. So what we're seeing, unfortunately, is a lot of overseas dumping that we saw early in the e-waste industry, where someone could load up full containers of panels, send it overseas, and then they're ultimately trying to get that value in aluminum, with the rest ultimately being landfilled. So the composition of the panels kind of gives you that perfect recipe that we saw on CRT monitors several decades ago. The bulk of it's glass. A single-sided panel could be 65 to 75% glass. A bifacial panel is typically around 80% glass. Then you have aluminum, silicon, and plastic. The aluminum is one of the highest valued materials by composition weight and the easiest to recover, where glass is the most challenging, so you have to break the encapsulate and separate out silicon, silver, plastic, and metals without contaminating them. It requires quite a bit of investment in technology. So it leads to what we've seen, in the e-waste industry, and we're really hoping we don't have to have that, in the solar industry, to give, any early black eyes to the recycling, is our Superfund cleanups, right? So, this is an example. Ones in the CRT where a lot of glass that had future plans was left behind. And again, it is all about the glass. This is ultimately a glass recycling game. So it's highly technical. It requires established relationships. For example, one of our biggest glass off-takers, it took several months of lab testing back and forth, contracting on and getting the exact size that could be used. When they bring it in, they have to do different EPA and air testing. So there's quite a bit that goes on before that manufacturer is ready to consume it. And then, a lot want to be a little bit cautious of kind of taking a recycle, call it, until they know there's a consistent supply of it. So it's a little bit of putting, the cart before the horse here. So also glass going back into solar glass. So abroad, this is something that's already currently happening. The technology is there. It's quite useful, and there's a few reasons for that abroad. One is a lot of the manufacturers are co-located near recyclers in other countries. Secondly, rail is quite available in other countries, and thirdly, it's not as large of a geographical footprint. But the biggest challenge in the U.S. is that U.S. glass manufacturer uses a process called float glass, which is higher quality glass produced but more importantly, way less energy intensive, which means costs are much lower. But most solar panel glass, even if it's put together in the United States, is manufactured in Asia, and it contains antimony. And antimony cannot be used in float glass processes. It could be used in rolled glass processes. Rolled glass is much more energy intensive. So even though that technology could be available in the United States to turn solar glass, call it, back into solar, there's some challenges to be cost competitive in a space where solar manufacturers are trying to, bring down the cost per watt just a half penny. Other things on the supply chain, what could potentially go back into solar is aluminum. So aluminum goes direct to foundries. These foundries take contracts to use this high-grade aluminum in quite a bit of different applications, such as industrial windows, frames, different type of high-grade commercial hubcaps for semi-trucks, and even solar frames. The silver, copper, these type of metals go to precious metal smelters. They obviously could recover it, make clean ingot. Those could also be consumed back into solar manufacturers. Glass, colored, and silicon are not used in the United States back into solar manufacturing. Silicon, for example, has to have a 6N purity, 99.99999. That's where the 6N comes from, to be used to make new wafers. So therefore, silicon is used in other applications, such as it's something used in crucibles when you're recycling steel, for example. Glass collet goes into different supply chains in the United States. It could go into what we already discussed. It could be sized down really fine and used as pozzolan. It could be used as aggregate in construction. It could be used in fiberglass applications. It could be used as collet that's used for reflective properties and different products that are being made. Legislative side of things, how does that help? So I think David kind of said it best on the EPR side of things. It's not going well in the United States, and personal opinion, or I guess SPR opinion, if you will, is that shouldn't be the outlook for the United States, and the reason for that is there's not a whole lot of leverage in that scenario. So most solar panels are manufactured overseas. 95% of the global market are silicon-based panels, with 5% being cadmium telluride. Since First Solar is located in the United States, that market share is about 65-35. But ultimately, going to solar manufacturers and putting this EPR when they're already at, again, half penny margin or half penny, goals to lower their pricing per watt, so they get those projects, they're probably not going to be have a huge appetite to put costs into that. And if there is energy, shortage, as you hear all the time in the United States, especially with data centers going up, I don't think there's going to be a lot of appetite to go to a solar manufacturer as a state saying, you can't bring your solar into that state. So, maybe advanced recycling fees could be a thing, or maybe, the private market could take care of that with, through things such as landfill bans. Texas on September 1st of last year has a solar recycling mandate, which ultimately says they are banned from landfills if there is viable solar recycling options. North Carolina is someone that's been very forward, or a state that's been very forward in looking into solar recycling. I had an opportunity to speak to that on the legislative floor for the Environmental Review Committee a few years back. And it's a top priority, as landfill capacity in North Carolina for its most populated areas has 10 years or less, and they recognize this as a new waste stream of substantial volume. So it's actually had bipartisanship, support. North Carolina DEQ also has a circularity advisory council to the state secretary that we sit on, and solar was put into their new 10-year solid waste management plan as actually one of the top priorities. They have a C&D landfill ban that's going into effect actually this year, 2025. It got delayed a bit. New installations over 2 megawatts have to submit recycling plans and show that it's going to true recycling. And then there's obviously quite other bit of states that are putting in different, policies, regulations, things of that nature. A shout out to North Carolina Clean Energy. This is a great map, and there's a very exhaustive report behind it that will kind of show different type of legislative or regulations or even guidance that states have at the local or state level on decommissioning and recycling. This is actually the 2024 map. They do a release at the end of each year, so there will be one updated version out there. All right. And from there, I will turn it over to any questions.
Thank you, Brett. I enjoyed, as you called it, the opportunity to nerd out a little bit on this stuff. But I appreciate the fact that every presenter has, while we're all talking about the same subject here, has found a way to make every sort of presentation here unique and add some more information as we're ourselves kind of gathering that and processing it. No pun intended. If there are any questions for Brett, I'd encourage folks to send them along. Do have a couple of you can either raise your hand or add them to the chat. I did notice in the chat that Chris from Urban Mining reached out. I think this is kind of a follow-up on Kathy's earlier question about pozzolan. He says that he would welcome trialing solar glass if there's volume. That was specific, I think, to David Orlandi in the Massachusetts location. And he included his contact information. So, that's one of the things I think that's been most valuable out of that group is just this group is making connections potentially. So maybe there's some value there. Let's see. There was also, I think Kathy pinged Dave about jurisdictions using permit requirements to address end of life panels, and that was addressed. Susan has a question about Washington's solar panel EPR, and I'll put it to Brett and to the other presenters too. I mean, um, it it sounds like something that's great in theory, but we haven't actualized it yet. Are any of your organizations doing specific work in Washington, and like what's it like on the ground up there?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think it's important to note that Washington set a deadline. I think this was 2 years back. I'll have to pull that up for solar manufacturers who want to sell in the state to submit a plan, and I think they came out and said one submitted it, so they had to uh, increase that time to do that. Um, but ultimately, there was a lot of obviously kickback from the manufacturers themselves. We do have a handful that are selling in that state that are participating in the program that would collect them and send them down to our facilities.
Mhm.
We actually have not received one from this EPR project yet, and we're one of the high volume recyclers in the nation. So, but I think those things take time. Um, step one, setting these up in a state, and step two is who's the enforcing body of them.
Dave Rolandi, any observations from up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit of anytime a new EPR program comes into place that impacts a new industry, there's always a bit of hesitance. So the one manufacturer that submitted plans in Oregon, which actually no longer manufactures solar panels, but they are also an e-waste consumer electronics producer, so they have a lot of experience with EPR. And so I think there's a combination of the industry just not knowing how important or how to deal with it. And so that might take some time. But agreed, there's been pretty much, other than that one, everybody has decided not to submit into the program. And yeah, not a lot of volumes coming out of there. The challenge is, again, the EPR is going to handle the cost of that processing. But most residential users are not going to go up on their rooftop, take their panels down themselves, and bring it to an EPR kind of program. So it's not clear whether or not that is a solution. Because I don't think any of the EPR programs that are being proposed are full EPR for full decommissioning.
Yeah, I concur. Yeah, I think it's a work in progress, actually.
Thank you. Yeah, I see Brett posted the resource recycling article from last April about that delay. And I heard specific to Brett's presentation. I think you other folks might have mentioned it as well, but Brett mentioned Europe and kind of just the difference in the geography, the impact of rail, the fact that the facilities are co-located. I mean, that's obviously great. Europe seems so far ahead of the United States and kind of dealing with this in I guess, a top-down kind of way. Um, Obviously, the United States, you guys are all in business, you're all doing this, so you're doing your part. Is there a role for government or governments here and maybe driving this? Is the Europe approach or are components of the Europe approach feasible here, or is there something different that you could see as beneficial?
Yeah, so part of the Europe approach is ultimately when a solar panel's sold, there's money that goes into a bucket more or less, and it's actually under their WE, which is under electronics recycling collection and legislative standards. So, the it will never be able to directly mirror the United States because it seems we have to have 50 different policies for 50 different states where it's, kind of a bit of the opposite. Anyone in the EU that's part of the we is kind of establishing, similarities there. But yeah, that could be an opportunity if there's, collection at the point of sale, kind of an advanced recycling fee could be an option. I think the market has appetite for this to also work out, just in the private market setting where the legislative side of things is to say, hey, there's all sorts of incentives at the federal level and maybe even local and state levels when these projects are getting going. And it's about clean energy. And but on the flip side of that, you got to hold the feet to the fire a little bit from the asset owners. Well, when it's time for these to come off site, they can't just go in our local landfills. So, our side is landfill bans. I know from a state level, there's normally some steps that have to occur before you get to that point. But I think, we've seen a lot of the largest asset owners in the United States, kind of go the route of putting infrastructure in and funding and a management program to recycle panels even ahead of being regulated. So that appetite is there. But I think from a legislative standpoint, having some sort of waste ban is really what the route that needs to happen.
Any other thoughts from our other presenters?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think waste bans and mandates on installation, again, just showing markets, so showing us the fact that there will be a market for it long term. I also do like the push to make it universal waste everywhere, just because there's always that question. And
Yep.
so for us having to manage, individual panel types and decide whether or not this is acceptable or not is always risky, and some states get a little bit too in the weeds on that end. And so we want anything like that would also be helpful, just anything that makes it easier for us to be able to move the material.
Yeah, I agree. I'll chime in a bit on here. Especially for, initially pushing alternative energy, then the government being the prime proponent of doing it, they have to have a solution for the material that is going to be produced in this when it becomes end of life. It can't ignore it. And it's always like the afterthought. And I've actually gone to bat in North Carolina a couple of times with research companies that were going to put up sites, I think in Virginia or somewhere around the area here, several different places, battling the state about, oh, this is considered, hazardous, and it's not. I teamed up with them. I think it was Aptum, one of those companies. They were putting the plan together, and part of that plan was going to include the recycling of the material at end of life, and to prove that it was universal. So they used our experience, data, and the work we've already done in the past, and helped them with their presentation, and we won the case. And when that happened, it changed everything. And you're right. I mean, each state's going to go through it. They're all going to go through it, and they're all going to probably say it's universal. But we all kind of have to work together on this if we want this to be a viable solution across the board.
Yeah. I was going to ask, if there were any people specifically in the audience that were, dealing with decommissioning or trying to find resources on this. We have a specific experience from Charlton, Massachusetts, 28 utility-sized solar projects, and have had issues with merely including MSW costs in decommissioning bond amounts. The planning board now has a policy that all utility-scale renewable energy projects, decommissioning plans, and decommissioning bond amounts must contain all costs to recycle 100% of the project. Since the new mandate makes towns accept more solar, we need to be financially protected. And then there's a plug, of course, for a waste ban. I'm kind of wondering specifically if we could get any information about kind of how that's gone down in Charlton, what the reception to that is, if you'd be willing to share.
Hi, Lori Degnan, Charlton Planning. We recently just voted on that, so we have not had it tested.
Yeah.
We do have a large project coming before us now with the decommissioning bond, and we're trying to get some amount in cash to follow the project because the developers sell them multiple times before they're even built. We're having a hard time keeping up with the validity of a mere insurance surety bond. So this has come about. So we have some cash on hand, and then the remainder being in a FDIC insured line of credit. Again, we're a small town, and trying to keep track of what decommissioning bonds we do have, it's very hard because we keep billing a company and then we realize they've sold twice. So again, for something that's being forced upon us, and I've been pretty vocal about everyone doing their share, they are all ending up here where there's less expensive land. So yeah, we already power more than twice what we need in solar. So we just figured this is another way to protect us should these companies disappear, go bankrupt. What good is a bond if it's only an insurance bond? And then if you read the back page of a Zurich bond, it doesn't cover anything that could be contaminated in the ground from runoff unless you can prove it that it came from the developer. So you and I both know they're going to be pointing fingers at each other saying, I didn't do it. And it'll just be a big attorney fest. So anyway, we're just trying to do what we can. Anyway, long story longer. Hopefully this will help us. Thank you.
Yeah. Appreciate you sharing on that, Lori. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but this is just kind of figuring out like what's happening in Massachusetts is so important here. One thing that Brett mentioned is kind of the changing profile of the customer base. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask was like going forward, do we see that as promising as more and more of these more and more of your customers seem to fit a certain profile as the ones that you have currently or have been serving in the past?
Do you mean that in terms of the consumers of the commodities or the sources of the solar panels?
Sources of the solar panels.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, that question could also piggyback a little bit off of what, great point Lori just brought up is that I guess two quick points here. The first one is the asset owner and the solar farm or solar site is gonna switch ownership quite a bit. So that does bring in some level of issues for keeping up with bonding and insurance programs. It's very rare that a site is built and then that same asset owner EPC keeps it throughout the life cycle. And you're also seeing a lot of consolidation in the industry, with a lot of major asset owners buying small to medium sites up. So on her note, I think a general landfill ban is a great step because it gives some sort of teeth and opportunity to make sure that if it does switch hands a few times and bonding or insurances do lapse, that there still is some sort of risk for that asset owner to make sure they're not throwing them in landfills. In terms of the profile of where panels are coming from, I don't see that changing a lot other than the consolidation side. We've had major asset owners that have sold two times some of their projects already, and it just goes to another client or another base. But really at the end of it, you're going to be sourcing from O&Ms. You're going to be sourcing, during the construction, the EPCs of the world and the actual utilities and asset owners. Is that what you're getting at, Sean? I guess I didn't quite understand, what you meant by the composition. I want to make sure I answer that properly.
Yeah, definitely to a degree.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was over here fielding another question. But yeah, I think I think at least here too, the composition is, and by here I mean Massachusetts again to be specific. Why is my screen doing this? There we go. Good. Um, there's just not a lot of it's not a lot of large scale stuff coming offline. Claudine, you got your hand raised actually.
Yeah,
Were
so
you going to
I
jump
just
in on that?
not quite on that. I just wanted to emphasize an earlier point that
Yeah.
recycling of these modules has gone down in cost, as shown by our presenters, particularly SPR. So, at the time of the publication of our white paper just a few years ago, solar panel recycling was at the order of $30 per panel, and the cost of disposal was at an order of magnitude less, about $3 per panel. So now we're seeing these recycling costs at around half the cost we saw just a few years ago, now at $15 per panel. So just wanted to highlight the kind of economic good news around solar panel recycling and we're hoping to see the cost of recycling within, say, the next 5 to 10 years closer to the order of magnitude of current disposal costs.
Yeah, if I could expand on that. So, it is very positive news, and it's only going to continuously come down as there's more hitting the recycling stream. There's still a little bit of volatility to panels and volume through multiple facilities. And at SPR, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse to make sure that some of our nationwide clients could be handled, with lower transportation rungs. But yeah, the costs of recycling, I believe, are going to continuously come down. There's some areas in the country where landfilling costs are so high, we already are at parity or even a bit lower than that, which is a huge positive. I guess the negative side of things right now is transportation's up quite a bit. So there's more of a need not only for regional recycling facilities to be actually doing the recycling right there, not just moving it to a partner or warehouse that it's just sitting just to be moved elsewhere. And then furthermore, developing further downstream consumers of the glass. So if glass could stay regional or even in state by a consumer, that lowers costs ultimately for recycling versus being shipped, halfway across the country, even sometimes out of the country, what we've seen some people do. So yeah, costs are continuously coming down and it's going to continue to.
Yeah, I agree with that too. We're seeing the same thing. Our processes are getting more and more refined, more automated, and we foresee the costs going down considerably very soon.
I was actually just taking a look here. When you Google something, sometimes you get the AI summary now. That's you may or may not want to get it, but I saw a question coming from Wayne about legal templates or best practice examples for municipalities here. And yeah, I think maybe there's something that can be shared there, but I actually see that there is currently some proposed legislation about decommissioning of solar panels and batteries that has to do with this sort of thing. So we'll see how they go. The legislation obviously is aspirational, and we'll see if there's actually some agreement there on what's possible. Anything else from the attendees? Okay. I'd really just like to thank our presenters. Just a ton of knowledge and experience in this room here. I know that I'm personally just going to go back and listen to this again and see if there's anything that I missed. I think that these conversations are serving as a basis for the update of our solar white paper, which I'd encourage folks to keep a lookout for as we get along further into 2026. We're going to be working on that. So, with respect to this conversation, stay tuned. There may be new developments. We're learning something every day, and again, we're just very grateful that the attendees were engaged and that our presenters really brought a lot of helpful information to the table. So again, thank you for your time and all the resources that you provided in the weeks and months heading up to this. So I look forward to staying in touch, and we look forward to staying in touch with all of you in this work group.
Hey, thanks for putting this together, Sean. And everyone, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Londi. Thank you, Brett. Thank you,
Yeah,
Haley.
thanks everyone.
Have a great day.
You as well.